So what does it truly mean to be resilient? And how can we balance resilience with authenticity? How can we not only bounce back from challenges, but do so in a way that honors who we are at our core? So today I am super excited to welcome Dr. Kate Lund. Hi, Kate. How are you?
Hello.
So Kate is a psychologist, a coach, and a speaker who specializes in helping individuals harness the power of resilience while staying true to themselves. So whether working with parents, educators, athletes, or leaders, Kate's goal is to help people not only overcome challenges, but also thrive in a way that feels once again authentic and aligned with their unique values and strengths. We're going to talk quite a bit about authenticity during this podcast. So welcome to this new episode of the Microdose Diet. I am your host, Peggy van der Plassche, and this podcast is all about getting more out of life. And I specialize in psychedelic powered personal and professional development. I wrote a book, More. If you're watching me, you can see it behind me, which is called The Microdose Diet, More the Microdose Diet. And each week on this podcast, I bring on guests like Kate to share their wisdom and strategy. So, Kate, once again, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Peggy. I really appreciate it.
No, that's fabulous. So, tell us more about your approach to building resilience in a way that honors authenticity. How do you help individuals, again, not only to overcome challenges, but thrive in a way that feels true to who they are?
Right. Yeah. And that's such a good question, right? Because sort of at its most foundational level, resilience is the ability to move through and beyond challenge, to get back up when we get knocked down. But to be truly resilient, I really believe that we need to help folks to appreciate their own unique context,
Mhm.
to thrive within that context. And so, how do we do that? We really help. It starts with self awareness, and
Mhm.
we help people through conversation, through coaching, through therapy to really understand where they're coming from and who they are. What is their context? Because we all are coming from very different contexts, right?
Yeah.
No, none of our contexts are the same. But how can we appreciate our own unique context without comparing ourselves to other people, without
Mhm.
thinking that we need to be like someone else? We need to
Yeah.
be someone else. We really want to help people appreciate where they're coming from, know what their strengths are, know how to use their strengths
Mhm.
to compensate for relative challenge, because we all have relative challenge as well, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
it's that kind of a complex process, but really comes back to helping folks to know themselves and to appreciate and thrive within their own unique context is sort of the foundational starting point that we work from.
Because what I've seen in myself and in others is that sometimes due to, childhood that might be, often actually quite complicated, our authentic self has been kind of buried.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what you're mentioning with having conversation, in the sense that having conversation with some of your clients to try to show them, well, that's who you think you are, but it's the context that made you that way. And actually your authenticity is a bit different. Do I understand correctly?
Yes, yeah. So it's that process of exploration within the context of coaching, therapy, that sort of thing, that helps folks to identify and understand who they really are and what that true context is. Because you're right, so much of our lives were influenced by those external variables.
Mhm.
What do our parents want us to be? What do our
Yeah.
parents think we should do? How do our parents think we should behave? And more than that, bosses, friends,
Yeah.
colleagues, the whole thing. So really helping folks to understand themselves within their own unique context, all, not ignoring other people, of course, doing that within the context of maintaining strong social connections, strong connections in the community, that sort of thing. But really that process of helping folks to hone in on who they really are is
Mhm.
vital.
Okay, yeah, because to your point, otherwise difficult to be resilient because your
Yeah.
foundations are shaky. I guess that's
Yeah.
really the first thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's spot on. Your foundation is shaky. And when our foundation is shaky, when we're second guessing ourselves, when we're, worried about whatever it might be, it's going to be really much harder to move through and beyond challenge, big or small.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, what are some of the biggest barriers that people, your clients face when trying to balance this resilience with authenticity? And how can they or how can we navigate this?
Right. Yeah. And that's such a good question. Right. And we've kind of touched on this idea of comparison. That's a
Mm-hmm.
huge,
Mm-hmm.
huge barrier to one's sense of authenticity and one's sense of who they are because, and comparison, it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
We look over and like, oh, our friend is better than we are at that. Or, oh, my kid hasn't hit that milestone yet. Why not? But
Mm-hmm.
these types of comparison really do take away from our ability to thrive within any context, let alone our own unique context. So that's a really important one, comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this sense of not being firm in our belief in ourselves,
Yeah.
not being able to touch on the possibility on the other
Yeah.
side of that challenge, because there's always possibility on the other side of challenge. And I'm not negating this idea of challenge because challenge is real, right? And
Yeah.
we're all going to face challenge day in,
Exactly.
day out, right?
Exactly.
And it's how we navigate through and beyond those challenges that's going to make all the difference.
Yeah.
But if we have this sort of foundational sense of, possibility on the other side of challenge, like, wow, this might
Yeah.
be really hard in the moment, but there's something on the other side of this and I'm going to get there, so it's perseverance, that
Yeah.
ability to move forward despite the challenge that's so
Yeah.
key. And when one is sort of wired in a way that that doesn't exist, becomes a big barrier.
Hmm.
So we also, kind of related to that is this idea of optimism. We want to
Yeah.
help folks to cultivate sort of a from the inside out kind of foundational sense of optimism. Goes back to seeing the possibility, because if the glass is always half empty,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have a really hard time navigating those challenges that, as we already mentioned, are inevitably going to come up.
Hmm. You know
Those are some
what?
of the biggest barriers.
I've seen, and thank you so much for that. I have like a moment as we're talking. It's really this idea also of powerlessness, and I think that's what you're touching with optimism and belief in
Yes.
ourselves. Is that you have this concept of learned hopelessness or
Yes.
helplessness,
Right.
and I find it very difficult to bounce back, to be resilient when, well, you have a belief that you're powerless, which I think comes very often from, some type of childhood that were very authoritative. That's what I went through. And you
Yes.
feel very powerless because whatever you see or do doesn't matter. And
Right.
so I'm sure
Doesn't
you have.
matter and it doesn't work. And then you're always
Yeah.
being told that it should be different or you should be different
You
or
can't, you can't, you can it can't, it's always can't, cannot,
yes.
like, and that I found is very difficult to overcome. It has taken a lot of work for me to, which is very much linked to the self-worth, to
Yes.
to
Yes.
be able to I would say level up my level of self-worth in order to feel a bit more important, a bit more powerful, a bit more competent, and become more optimistic. It's difficult to be optimistic when you feel you never can do anything good.
Absolutely. And you mentioned those early messages that we get, out there in the world, whether it be from family or school or what have you. And those are so powerful because they become entrenched.
Hmm.
And as you say, it's really important to recognize the impact, and then work through it over time. And it's a process. It's easier said than done for sure, but
Yeah.
so important because, as you say, that can really hold us back. And I too have experienced that on some levels myself. So I totally hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and like your first point on comparison, I see that very much as well, especially in North America, with success. This
Mhm.
idea that whatever we do needs to be once money generating. That's you need to money. You don't do anything for the pleasure. It needs to be successful, and it
Yes.
needs to be money generating. It cannot be I just paint for my pleasure in my garden. You need to want to do an exhibit, and the exhibit needs to sell. Like it's
Yeah.
always very, very high bar, and so there is the comparison, but there is the social pressure. I think that's what I was going to say as an add-on to what you're saying with comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. And social pressure is real, right? This feeling like we have to do it because that's what's expected. And
Yeah,
so, the society expects it, our family expects it, our friends expect it, what have you. And so being able to modulate that in a way that makes sense still allows us to be true within the context of our authentic self, and still, move forward and build a life and career that we believe is successful,
yeah,
and it's really important that, we don't get too fixated on, because I mean, the practicalities, as you say, are real. Making money, very, very important, all
yeah,
these things. But, keeping that in perspective and in balance is also important, and
yeah.
not letting that drive the whole process.
Yeah, we don't talk enough about joy. It's
Right.
really about like, okay, it needs to be again a success, money making after. Well, if you enjoy it, good, but we don't really care.
Yeah,
So
right, right, and that joy is so important, and you make such a great point there because we often lose sight of the
exactly,
joy in everything that we do because we're so fixated on driving forward, moving forward, and sometimes that can come at the expense of everything else, and so really important to help folks step back and create that space so that that doesn't happen.
yeah, and to your point, experiencing life. We tend to forget that we're here to experience, so we get so focused on something, and then you're like, oh, I totally miss the point. Yes, maybe I was successful or maybe not on top of that in my career, but I totally missed the point where the goal was to kind of experiment and experience with life.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's finding that balance, and it's striking that balance over time that makes so much difference, and
Yeah,
managing your expectations of yourself as well as of others,
yeah,
that sort of thing. So it's a whole bunch of variables to balance out here, but the
yeah.
core is really staying true to yourself within the context.
So you work with a lot of parents, educators, leaders. So when what would be your top three piece of advice for these people or for us actually who look to foster both resilience and authenticity?
Right. And so, really, at the top of the list, the thing that I would say that I teach most people that I'm working with, very first thing out of the gate, is a way to manage their stress response. Because
Interesting.
the thing is, if we're so kind of stressed, moving so fast, and we're starting up here, and then a challenge hits,
Oh, you're
we're gonna
already, yeah,
escalate to the point of shutdown.
yeah.
So we really want folks to be able to stay even, stay right
Hmm.
in, managing the stressors that they're inevitably gonna face. So this is the first thing, and I teach them a technique that is derived from a very well-known technique called the relaxation response, which was developed by a physician in Boston named Herbert Benson. And he developed this technique in the 70s to help his medical patients manage anxiety. And, in the 70s, stress management, all that stuff wasn't
Yeah.
really a thing.
Hmm.
He caught a lot of negative feedback for that
Yeah.
originally, but he stuck with it, persevered. Technique became so effective with his medical patients that it really has proliferated and become the cornerstone of the mind body medicine program at Mass General Hospital, and is used across domains, across contexts, for helping people to manage their stress response. And so, super easy technique. Really, you think of a word or a phrase
Uh-huh.
you find soothing in some way,
Yeah.
and you breathe. So, and nothing special about the way you're breathing. So you breathe, and really what you're doing in this process, the word or the phrase is kind of like the placeholder. Your mind's going to want to wander, but you just kind of
Mhm.
let it happen. The more you practice, the less your mind wanders. But really, you're calming your central nervous system.
Yeah.
And if you're
Mm.
practicing on either side of the day, like 5-10 minutes in the morning, 5-10 minutes in the evening, kind of placeholders, eventually you're gonna create that more modulated baseline in terms of how you're
Mm.
encountering and managing through and beyond stressors.
Mm.
So that's the first thing that I teach them, and that's really at the foundation of everything.
I think, like that's something as well that I found is that calming the nervous system
Yeah.
is really, the cornerstone, because if you're constantly in panic, fight or flight, to
Yeah.
your point, it's like one little straw is going to break your back, so rebaselining at a lower level makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that strategy, but I was trying it as you were talking. I will definitely try it. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry I interrupted you. What are your other advice?
Yeah, no, so that's the first and foremost, right? And so the message there is, to really give this technique a try, because,
Yeah.
oftentimes people will be like, oh, well, I tried it, it didn't work. But the thing is, it has to be consistent
Yeah.
practice.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's not like a button that we can push, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
as you're, getting your body, your nervous system used to doing this, you know, it really, really helps. And then obviously it's, you can do a lot of other things to sort of calm your central nervous system in the moment, coffee with a friend, a phone call with a friend,
Mhm,
a
mhm.
walk around the block, some music that you find calming. There are lots of things that we can do. So
Yeah.
to help someone find the technique that works for them and they can
Mhm.
work into their day and routine is really, really important. So
Yeah.
there's that. And then we want to really help folks to get in touch with their strengths. Because oftentimes folks will come to me and be like, I don't have any strengths. What do you mean? And I can promise you that they're always strengths.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just shifting that perspective on how someone's viewing themselves.
Mhm, mhm. Well,
So that's
just
super
that is a
important.
good red flag. When someone is coming is telling you have no strength, you're like, okay, well, that's telling. That's where you're starting from low self worth, and lack of self awareness as well.
Right. Yeah. And that low self-worth piece, we really want to try to turn that over and
Yeah,
help folks to create a sense of self-efficacy and belief in themselves,
yeah.
belief in possibility. Another important piece is helping folks to hone in on and appreciate individual difference,
Mhm, mhm,
really
mhm.
understand that we're all different. We all bring unique experiences, context to the table,
Yeah.
and to really embrace those things from these different angles really is also another important point.
Mm. I like that you bring a lot of focus on individuality, because you were taking to find a relaxation method that works for you, because because and it's not just for you, it's for you right now, because sometimes that work well on Monday and on Sunday doesn't work as well, so, and I
Exactly.
think that's important. Yeah.
That is such a great point. Exactly. It's flexibility in our approach to this whole thing and
Yeah.
figuring out what works best for you. And that might shift from day to day or minute to minute.
Yeah.
So being open to flexibility in that and trying different things at different points and building that awareness to know when it's important to give something else a try.
Hmm. So you mentioned, advice and how you work with clients, and I guess how you help clients to stay or become actually mentally strong and authentic even through setbacks. Do you have any success stories you could share, or any other tidbits that you think are important for the audience?
Yeah, so gosh, it's success story. One comes to mind in particular that I just love this story because this was a middle-aged woman came in. She was really run down, feeling kind of depressed, probably bordering on clinical depression, very
Hmm.
anxious, just overwhelmed.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so we kind of started there and worked on the relaxation response and learning how to modulate the central nervous system. But the really cool thing is that so in this person's past, they were a competitive athlete
Oh.
and they had totally lost sight of that part of themselves and really lost hope or um, lost belief in their possibility to move back in that direction.
Oh, interesting.
And so, as part of the calming the central nervous system, working on some of the, mood related symptoms, anxiety, building this belief in self back, this particular person went back to compete in their sport
Oh,
at a
wow.
very high level. In fact, internationally. So
Oh.
cool. And I was so happy for this person because they really were able to put a lot of this stuff into play and they were able to apply that to a dream that they had, but a dream that they had lost sight of.
Hmm. Hmm.
So super, super rewarding to work with someone in finding
Yeah.
that passion, in reconnecting with that thing that was so important to them, back
Yeah.
in the day. And they're doing it again. And
Oh,
they're
wow.
competing a lot now.
That
So
is very impressive. Very impressive. Because, it's funny. I don't know for you, I was not an athlete when I was younger, but I always thought that, oh, once you had this, this discipline and this competitive mindset and experience, it's something you always have. And I never really thought that, you could lose track of it. And I guess life as that way of maybe chipping at you as well. I always thought that when you were an athlete, you were, as a kid, as a young adult, you were so much ahead of everyone just because of a mental excellence that you had experience at a young age.
yeah, and I think that, that experience, past experience that one might have and that this particular client has, definitely once they shifted back into that place of like thinking, "Oh, this might be possible."
Yeah.
That muscle memory I think does
Yeah.
help. I think
Yeah.
that is true.
Yeah.
Um, relative to, starting this brand new sport, never having done it before. So I think the history is helpful.
Yeah.
Um, but I totally get what you're saying. But yes, it is possible to lose sight of.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I have a question for you. Do you see more patients or clients coming with that sense of overwhelm? I feel it became a bit more common after COVID for whatever reason. Is it something you've seen, or is it me who's imagining that?
No, I think you're spot on with that. Overwhelm is sort of an epidemic out there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so common, for folks to be overwhelmed. Then that starts to impact their mood, their levels of
Yeah.
anxiety. And so, what we really want to help to prevent is for those mood related symptoms or anxiety related symptoms to become clinical, to tip
Yeah.
over
Hmm.
into clinical where it's really, going to be shutting them down, perhaps. But absolutely, we're all, I think, to some degree overwhelmed. And I feel like the post-COVID situation for sure, because it's, I know I, for one, you know, had some overwhelm getting back out into the world. It
Hmm.
was really
Hmm.
nice not driving my kids for 2 hours or 3 hours each day during
Yeah.
it. It's really nice.
Um,
I have to say that was really nice. And so just recalibrating after,
yeah. The recalibrating. That's the
back out
word.
into the world was challenging, and I think that's one thing that definitely, has sparked overwhelm in general.
Have a recalibration. That's a great point. I was not able to put my finger on it. I'm like, why are we all overwhelmed? Recalibration. So can you tell us more? People who are listening are probably interested in knowing more about your work as a coach and speaker. How can they connect with you? Tell us a bit more about where we can find you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so there are a couple places. So LinkedIn is a really good place. So I'm very active on LinkedIn, so
Okay.
can be accessed there. And then I also have a website, which is www.katelundspeaks.com.
And I'll put the link in the notes and all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then I have a podcast called The Optimized Mind. So that is a very exciting project for me, and we can certainly connect there as well. And
Okay.
a book will be coming out at
Yeah.
some point shortly,
Okay.
talking about resilient parenting.
Oh, and I think, parenting is such a hot topic,
Yes. Yes.
because it is, I think, again, and we discussed that offline, but just being able to survive the world without even having children is quite challenging. You add to that bringing to the world, children that obviously you want to have well adjusted, is, I think, such a hot topic. So I think you will see a lot of people interested. And for you who are listening, I'm sure most of you are parents. Dr. Kate can definitely help you with that overwhelm, but also being a better parent. I think that's very important. Is, being a better parent means better children.
That's the hope, right? That we're practicing these things to help us become a resilient parent, are then passing those variables, those skills
Exactly.
to our kids through modeling and through observation and that whole thing. So absolutely, that's the big idea.
Exactly. So, do you have, I know we're already out of time, do you have any parting thoughts, anything you would like to share with the audience that maybe we didn't touch on?
Well, we did touch on it actually, but it's this idea of holding on to the possibility on the other side of challenge, and both for yourself as well as for your kids, because there
Mm.
always is possibility.
Yeah, it's something you told me when we spoke first a few days, weeks ago. I don't know, time flies, but you mentioned with your kids going to university and applying, and to apply to, I can't remember which university you mentioned, it was 56,000 applicants. And
Yeah.
that stayed in my mind. I was just like, oh my God, for sure, you obviously want to tell your kids that they can make it, but you also want to tell them that there are other possibilities. So
Yes.
it's managing this. Yes, we're going to do everything we can to get your choice number A, but
Yes.
choice number B and C can also be possible and great.
Exactly. That is precise, spot on. That's exactly the point, right?
Yeah.
So looking at the range of possibilities and not just seeing things as a black and white sort of way it has to be.
Yeah. And that's where the comparison and authenticity becomes so important.
Yes,
Because if everyone wants choice A, well, you need to be able to stand your ground and say if it's B and C, it's fine as well.
exactly.
So
Absolutely. And that goes back to belief in self and belief in,
exactly.
hitting goals and all of that.
So we did the 360 in 30 minutes from what we discussed at the beginning to the end. Well, thank you so much, Kate. Really, that was a delight to speak with you. I'm sure the audience would have learned a lot. If you're listening, if you're watching, don't hesitate to contact Dr. Kate. She's going to be extremely helpful, regardless of your challenge, but especially if you're parents and educators. That's I think probably the area that need the most support, from my perspective. So thank you again for your time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.